Please.
Okay, sorry for the delay. Now everything is set, so we can start. It's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Dvoršek. I hope I pronounced your name right. Who is the deputy head of the Open Science and Research Infrastructure Unit at the European Commission. Previously, he served as the head of the European Commission unit responsible of delivering IT solutions for grant management, including the services of funding and tenders portal. With over a decade of experience in the field, he brings a wealth of knowledge from his work in the IT software development and delivery, including from industry prior to joining the Commission in 2008. The floor is yours.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you.
Thank you so much, Tim. And very kind regards from my side here from Brussels to everybody who is listening. I don't see the faces or names, so I will have to deal with my screen only at the moment and see my presentations in order for you to see it clearly. And I'll run you through the presentation, give you a little bit of an overview of the context of this European Open Science Cloud, also some of the initiatives on the open science domain that the European Commission is following or somehow sometimes sponsoring or supporting. But then towards the second part of my presentation, I will tell you more about what European Open Science Cloud is about, where we stand, what we have achieved in the recent years, and also give you a little bit of an insight into what's coming next.
Excuse me, 1 minute. If you have questions, please add it to the chat and we'll have a question session in the end, yeah? If it's okay with you.
Yeah, absolutely, okay. Of course. Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you so much. So let me start with a little bit of a political context. So this is our President of European Commission, von der Leyen, who, that at the moment Europe is very much focused on the competitiveness, on its position in the global setup, and, making sure that, we push the agenda on the clean and digital economy forward. And that was really recognized that innovation, science and technology and the research is at the center of the economy. So it's fundamental to it. And in the last year, several reports came out by important elite, very important and reputable representatives. One by Enrico Letta, he's an ex-prime minister of Italy, and another one by Manuel Heitor, who was leading the expert group on the interim evaluation of Horizon Europe. And Manuel Heitor, Mr. Heitor, is also ex-prime minister of Portugal. So in the context of that, they were both highlighting that, the European knowledge commons are really a central pillar to the strategy that I mentioned earlier, and how the centralized digital platform that would really provide access to publicly funded research and data sets and knowledge and educational resources is very important, is at the center of it. And equally, Mr. Heitor recognized in his report that European Open Science Cloud has really a potential to become one of the most widely used infrastructures in Europe if developed properly. So there's a lot of, energy and enthusiasm behind what we are doing at the political level as well. And that doesn't come completely as a surprise, I would say. We have quite a history behind, which I will look at it earlier, but let me just point out some of the challenges that we are facing and that are always useful to have in mind when talking about the open science and the initiatives that European Commission is supporting. We still are there have been studies conducted, and this is some of the information coming out of that there is still less than 50% of scientific publications available in the open access. Then, of course, a lot of data and other outputs like software or, I don't know, these days AI models and so on, very often end up in some sort of a local local storages instead of repositories that would be more broadly available. And here you can see that 4 out of 10 researchers really store data in a non-local repository, so really share. So we still have less than 50% of sharing there. And also the FAIR principles to put in practice is also still at the minority side of the scale. But at the same time, everybody is recognizing how, publishing is very important to the researcher's career. So we need to keep in mind that as well, how, what researchers do feel counts. So open science in that sense has been really a central priority for EU research policy. And openness itself is not the end, right? It is really a means to achieve higher efficiency and robustness, creativity and societal responsiveness of research. It's also a little bit of a paradigm shift because in fact, it changes the culture, affects the whole research cycle. It impacts the whole, plethora of stakeholders. But the digital technology is really allowed to unblock the openness, unblock the information flows, and sharing the access to scientific system. And that also implies that now sharing and knowledge and tools, between disciplines and beyond is possible. It's more possible than it used to be before. And as long as we agree that, FAIR is really a baseline, that then opens a lot of new opportunities. Open science in the EU has been around for quite a while now. This is just a list of number of high-level conclusions or actions or political statements, including a number of European Council conclusions that you can see that support that are talking about really implementation of open science and research assessment, about the transparent, open, trustworthy scholarly publishing. Most recent last year was about strengthening the competitiveness of EU, which also came up very strongly around the open science as a center and one of the pillars of enabling this. So it's quite high on the agenda, in the political context on the research. But European Commission really believes that open science is the way to go, and we would like to support embracing it as the modus operandi for the research. And to get there are two things that basically we see need to happen. One is definitely working on the practice, so making sure that researchers know, about it. Secondly, of course, to encourage and incentivize the immediate and unrestricted open access to the publications, to data, algorithms, and so on. To have outputs managed in line with FAIR principles, to make sure everything is available as soon as possible. So pre-registrations, shared repositories, preprints are at the center of that, making sure that outputs can be verified and reproduced, and also encouraging the collaboration with civil society, with end users, including with companies and so on as well. It's a way of also instilling trust in science, right? On the other hand, in order for the practices to happen, we need to have a number of enablers in place. One is definitely a question of incentivization of this culture, behavior, practices, make sure that incentives and rewards are there. And in that context, I will mention a bit more in details later. We're working hard on the reforming research assessment. There is, of course, we know very well that legislative and regulatory environment for practicing open science needs to be there as well. There are a number of regulations in EU that touch related to copyright, the data. There are a number of digital legislative that have been brought forward in the recent years, and the researchers sometimes have is a challenge for a researcher to navigate across, and that has to be done. We need to make sure that they have the means to know what can be done with the data, what are their rights, and so on. And at the same time, we need to provide an open research infrastructures and skills. So Open Science Cloud, European Open Science Cloud, or EOSC, I would probably often use the acronym because it's very natural to me, is one of the elements there. We are also developing and providing the open access publishing service, which is called Open Research Europe. I'll mention a bit more later. And then there is also, we see a huge demand on skills that are needed for data intensive research. And that's where we also come in play, and we try to support development of curricula and so on in that direction. Maybe I will start with Horizon Europe, which is the current funding program at the European level. It's one of the largest, or maybe the largest funding program, research funding program in the world. It accounts for about, I think in total budget was 90 billion over 7 years. We still have, let's say, 2.5 years ahead, a little bit more, of Horizon Europe. And in Horizon Europe, this, what I've mentioned earlier, the strategies related to open science are really embedded in it, and the Horizon Europe reflects this policy. We have requirements for immediate open access to the scientific publications. They need to be deposited in repositories under the CC BY license. We only reimburse cost of publication if it's published in the full open access venue. There are the requirements regarding the IPR retention that the researchers or institutions need to comply with, etc., etc. So very strong message in a way already embedded in the funding system at the European level. Then, of course, also on the data management, we also require data management plans to be produced and kept up to date in the life cycle of a project. That needs to be published under CC BY license as well, and in the kind of a vein of as open as possible, as close as necessary, meaning that some data we understand are sensitive, and there might be good reason not to share it openly and publicly. But whatever can be published and be open, we require to be open. And we encourage a number of other practices like early sharing, making sure that things are reproducible, making sure that the citizens, whenever possible, are also involved, and exchange around that also between different member states and so on. Maybe a few of the policies that are also very important, and that's why I start with that, because European Open Science Cloud cannot function without some of these elements being in place, or some of the elements are also not necessarily enablers or precursors, but they're maybe also supporting the uptake eventually. One of the most essential and fundamental is obviously the reforming research assessment, where we have the current situation that research assessment methods rely heavily on the publication-based metrics, like citation counts, and then they fail to recognize the width of the array of the contributions by researchers. So all the activities, actions related to open science, making sure that the data is clean and properly, enriched with the metadata, and that it's shared in accessible repositories. All this work that actually requires quite a lot of work and investment, needs to be recognized, and it's not at the moment. Sometimes it's not yet, and that then, of course, the detriment of the open science. So in our case, in the reforming research assessment, where we are working together within the organization, Coara, the vision is to recognize the diverse outputs, practices, and activities, and to maximize the quality of research and its impact. And that the assessment itself should be really based on qualitative judgment that can be supported by the quantitative indicators, but in a responsible way. So this is very important for us. And for that, a few years ago, in 2022, we have established, or we have together with partners, a coalition called COARA, which is a coalition for advancing research assessment. And before that, there was an agreement that has been prepared on reforming research assessment, which up to date now, I mean, a couple of weeks ago, 825 organizations have signed. They range across the world. It's not Europe-based only, and as well 724 members of QARA. And basically what they do is they sign the agreement, they agree to some basic principles regarding and commit to change within a time frame that they elaborate or develop themselves. And yes, of course, we encourage the sharing of experiences in implementation of those actions amongst them. There are a number of working groups associated or under the QARA, which work on different elements. There are also national chapters well underway, where basically at national level, countries work towards the reform. Commission is strongly involved, very in the governance itself, where we are as an observer very active. And we are also co-chairing a working group on improving practices in the assessment of research proposals. As I mentioned, legislation around is also very important. Really, we talk about EU legislation fit for research, and with that we mean, that the researcher knows what it means to access or reuse publicly funded research results or publications or data for research purposes. What can be shared, what kind of licenses need to be put in place, what about personal data. All these things are very important and can be sometimes difficult for the researchers to navigate. So we are really working hard to deliver some guidelines, but also potentially some regulatory interventions in order to simplify things for researchers. We have made, and it's very interesting to look into, a latest study that has been published May last year, where we really evaluate different effects of EU copyright framework on research, but also also the digital legislation, and what effects there are and what measures we could propose in order to improve the situation. We also have on the open access, we are very active. So there we have, we are developing and offering an Open Research Europe, which is an open access peer-reviewed publishing platform. So far, the eligibility to publish on it is that you have to be part of a project, EU-funded project. It's an optional service, so nobody is required to publish there, but it is there, and by publishing there, you automatically are compliant with all the requirements of Horizon Europe, and at the same time, it's for no cost to the authors. Everything is paid by the funder, so in this case, Commission. It's quite innovative because we offer a post-publication open peer review, which means that first you publish and then peer review takes place. It's everything is open access and CC BY license. There are very high scientific standards and policies in place. So there is a scientific advisory board that is composed of a number of representatives of the community. There is publisher policies and guidelines that are strictly followed by the public publishing service. That includes also the fact that that when you publish an article, the data has to be made available. Also, the description of the methods that have been used have to be there, and so on. It's cross-discipline, so it's not specific to any discipline particularly. We have developed also what we call community gateways and collections, so that you can find within your domain easier articles that might be relevant to you. And then, of course, it's also fully indexed. So after the article gets peer reviewed, it is automatically pushed into the indexers. And it is there in all of the major ones. It's, I don't know, I think 20 or even more indexers that we are covering, but here is just a little few very famous ones or very visible ones. What is very interesting is recent development, where last year we have worked together with a number of organizations across Europe, mainly funders, national funders, to transform this Open Research Europe into a service that would be collectively supported, which by multiple funders and institutions, and would still leave the publication costs, with the funder, so there would be no cost for a researcher to publish. This would also, if when additional funders join, will open up the eligibility, so it will not be restricted only to the EU-funded researchers. We are also moving it from the currently proprietary-based software to an open source. So we have signed a contract with the Public Knowledge Project, which is behind the OJS, Open Journal System, and they are now upgrading this platform so that it has all the capacities and requirements that Open Research Europe needs in order for it to migrate next year onto that platform. So it will be fully open source based. And we are now working with those funding organizations, but also some of the ministries and research performing organizations who towards really signing an agreement. And as a precursor to it, in January, they have already signed a statement of intent to support and fund AURA. And that was done by 11 organizations so far. And some of them are still considering signing it soon. And finally, of course, on the open science front, citizen science, we have a number of projects that we have funded. I will not go into too many details here, but just to show that we are very eager into the engaging with the community and going beyond with the civil society to make sure that trust in science is important to us, and engagement of the citizens in it, especially so. And we fund a number of projects there, and also mutual learning exercise has been conducted amongst 11 member states and associated countries, where they have explained and discussed between themselves what are the best ways of integrating citizens also into this world of science. And now, I mean, giving a little bit the chapeau or a quick run through of different activities and initiatives on the open science front, I want to give a little bit more time to the European Open Science Cloud itself, to look into what we are doing, where we come from, and also what's coming soon. This a little bit links to the first slide, or one of the first slides that I shown with these little graphics. There was this study on the European research data landscape that has been conducted and undertaken between the June 21 and 22. It's not maybe completely recent, but it still, I think, very much reflects the situation out there, where indeed 40% of researchers occasionally store data in research repositories, and around 20% only 20% during the recent research activity, so very low. And the researchers very often store it, like I said, locally in an institutional shared drive, or sometimes even on a local USB stick. We've seen that a lot, or CDs from the past. So a lot of fair aligned practices still, the data management plans still are not always done systematically. Fair practices are not always common, depends on the discipline. Some disciplines are very, very up to speed, and they really deliver and they really work in this direction, while some other disciplines are lagging behind. For example, a good example is this identifiers, where permanent identifiers, so that data is easier findable, and then which data set you're working with, is still low on the list of priorities of some of the researchers, so they don't necessarily use it systematically. And they've said some of the barriers why not to do so is the time and effort and financial cost it takes in order to make sure that the data is, let's say, fair and shared. The question on the legal certainty is very much up there among the reasons why. And also the question of incentives or recognition of the work that is behind in order to achieve all that, which in some cases unfortunately still doesn't count towards maybe progress of your career and so on, researcher's career. So EOSC. When we understand this landscape, then it's also important to know that EOSC is not just an IT system, and it's not just an infrastructure, but I would say, we tend to say it's these three things. It's a process, it's an infrastructure and it's an ecosystem. So as a process, it helps to accelerate this open science approach. It incentivizes, fair data management, and especially in the digital world, of course. It also stimulates the cooperation between different communities, between different researchers, between institutions as well, and also helps aligning investments. Very often, it helps when we discuss with member states, when your commission says, okay, we will go in this direction, we align these priorities, and then that brings the extra leverage that is needed in order to succeed, right? It is an infrastructure. So it facilitates access to research infrastructures across Europe and other resources like compute, storage, um, um, and maybe some other things. Then it also allows researchers to store, share, process, and importantly, analyze the data and reuse the digital objects. But it's also a community. We see an ecosystem of community that is growing, that is sharing, that is exchanging a lot, that is very, very vibrant in Europe, which helps also in developing the skills, sharing practices, sharing tools. And we work at different levels in order to keep the community active and growing. We do that at European level. We organize a number of European level events, but then also at national level and even institutional level within individual or universities or research institutes, etc. And from the user perspective, what EOSC is, what I want to give you a little bit of an idea is what one can imagine when using EOSC. And we have different actors when we look at it. We have obviously researchers, the users themselves. We have also providers, those who provide services. And of course, as a commission, we are a policymaker, but not only us. There are also member states involved. There are also research institutes involved. So we have these different types of perspectives that we may want to consider whenever we talk about EOSC. And for the user, probably one of the most important thing is, how can I find a data set or knowledge like an article or tools that I might be used? Can I access it and under what conditions? Can I reuse these resources? Is there enough metadata around that so that it's useful for me? Can I access that seamlessly across different scientific domains without needing each time to register and get a new credentials and so on? Can I combine these services and integrate, like I use the data set from one place and move it to another place and use it in combination with something else? Can I create workflows that can automate this process and maybe process the data through different services and provide me with some outputs, intermediary or final? Can I analyze this data in a kind of a seamless and maybe sometimes collaborative way through what we call virtual research environments? And also, very importantly for the user, it is more and more, even I would say, important to recognize that what you find in EOSC is of quality. It has a certain level of quality it stands behind what you can find there, because the communities are really working towards curated and high value, in a way, data that is available there. As a research provider, for them, a story is slightly different probably, but they enable the users to make data fair, to deposit their resources somewhere. They can also they allow to or facilitate sharing, facilitating integration into the indexers, linking information through knowledge graphs, supporting tracking and reuse. And for them, that's important because if everything is well connected, meaning that just of a sudden, as a service or research provider, you have access to a completely new user base that otherwise, it goes beyond your typical sphere. And it allows to be visible beyond there. It allows cross-domain research. It allows resources that can be used that otherwise wouldn't have been, or maybe go unnoticed by other domains. And for us, the policymakers, including the member states and funders, it is a way of providing the resources. It is a way to facilitating building and implementing it, but also to get an insight into the indicators of open science. So to see at what level we are, how much of the data is shared, how much of it is fair, what kind of other digital artifacts are coming out, what's important, what's not, develop policies around that, and so on. So all that are different perspectives that we consider and that are very important when we're building now the EOSC as an infrastructure. On the Commission side, we are very engaged. I already kind of hinted that at the political level, it's quite central. It is also EOSC is also part of the what we call European Strategy for Data. So it's one of the common European common data spaces, particularly for research innovation. There are others like sectorial in different industries or transport or etc. But EOSC is the data space for research and innovation at the European level. Horizon Europe supports implementation of EOSC and the community and in general open science through research infrastructure calls. And within the 7 years period, so the current framework program, there have been earmarked of almost half a billion of euros. Maybe we will go even beyond that. Let's hope that will be directly invested through grants into the EOSC development, but not purely the infrastructure itself, but as a whole, right? The full landscape. I have to say that at the same time, we are tracking also the investments by member states and by community, by the institutes, and through, let's say, cash contributions or through in-kind contributions, which is the majority of it, and additional activities that the number of researchers in the community actually offer and provide, we see that we have already overpassed 1 billion mark that comes then from the other side. So not from the EU investment, but from the community themselves, from the researchers, which basically it's very, very, very good result. We were planning to have double the investment, so another $500 million on that side within the 7 years, but already within the first 4 years, we have overpassed 1 billion of investments on the community side. And that means that EOSC is being developed, is being built up. We have now EOSC EU node that I will explain a little bit in later. That is first node of what we call to become an EOSC federation of nodes. We have a tripartite governance that is between the Commission, between the member states, and between the community represented by the EOSC Association. We are coordinating at different levels of forums or relationship with member states, all the work. And of course, we are, like I said, monitoring the uptake of open science through what we call EOSC Observatory, which is a way of reporting back by the member states and the community on the uptake and the effects of the open science. Some of the examples of projects that we have funded, this is just very, very few. There are many, many more. But just to give you a little bit of an idea of what kind of things are being funded. So, for example, core components of the EOSC ecosystem, there is support to more fair data and services. There is a support, for example, there was a skills for EOSC, which really was about developing training ecosystem for open and fair science. AI for EOSC, of course, artificial intelligence is today the name of the game very often. It's been talked about in every corner of society, and indeed that project has been launched already a few years ago. That was about the AI, but machine learning, deep learning models and applications in the EOSC. One also very concrete example was this EOSC for cancer, where there was investment into acceleration to data-driven cancer research. And these are just like a handful of projects. There are many more, like I said, and a lot is going on in different domains. We've seen emergence of very, very good outputs in various domains of virtual research environments, where basically researcher can log in and start using services and data from all over Europe that are coming from different institutes or different organizations, and that's very encouraging. Now, of course, our bigger goal is to go beyond individual specific domains and start interconnecting that at a wider scale. And how do we go about that? So EOSC EU Node, this is from our perspective really a new phase of EOSC. Before, over a decade almost, there have been a number of projects that I mentioned that we have funded and have delivered many results. Of course, a project is of a temporary construct, while for us, we would like also to see that if EOSC to become really a fundamental infrastructure in Europe, that this is also not only kind of a project-based place, but is something that has a sustainable future, that is properly financially supported, properly governed, managed, operated, if I can say so. And the first step towards that, it was building what we call now EOSC EU Node. In 2023, the Commission has signed a procurement contract titled Managed Services for European Open Science Cloud Platform. And that's what we today is basically called EOSC EU Node. And the objectives were to build and deploy a fully operational infrastructure for EOSC that is based on the EOSC interoperability framework. This is something that has been discussed, defined, and shaped over the years, that is secure and it is cloud-based, that offers really high-quality production-grade services and upgraded, I can say, superior user experience to a large number of users with 24/7 functionalities available. So it's not something that is running on one machine and maybe sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not, but something that the researcher can rely on, that can go to and can actually use on a daily basis. And you start a project today, and you know that 3 years from now, when your project is still running, the services and then the support will still be there. And indeed, the procurement is not only about developing it, but is also covering the costs of operations, maintenance, and support for the 36 months or for 3 years. The building started at the beginning of last year, and the idea behind was to offer some of these things I've said, but really to facilitate the creation of the web of fair data, to somehow put a seed in the ground and show the way that it is possible to operationalize a node at the European level and really run it, like I said, professionally, full production level, with all the support, help desk, everything there running permanently, so that users, researchers, but also service providers can rely on it being there. It would offer a number of core services like single sign-on, like a knowledge graph or a catalog, so that you can find your way around application workflows. It also offers a way to monitor the usage, the accounting. I will mention that a bit more maybe later, help desk and so on. And through that, users log in. They have a place to log in. They can reserve a time for compute or a time for storage. They can use Jupyter notebooks. They can use large data transfer facilities, so that this is done in asynchronously when it really goes for a large amount of data. They can share data and files within, like, they can create kind of a project community, and they can share amongst themselves. So there's a lot of already there in this core offer. But also, while building it, we are also defining a pathway, or in a way, a blueprint for other nodes to also create similar, let's say, infrastructure based on this architecture, and offer it to their community or to their country or cross-country, etc. So there was a lot of interest there, and things are now really emerging. So this EU node was progressively, I would say, launched end of last year. Started with announcement of the launch in September in the ERA stakeholder conference in Brussels. We had first technical launch where we demonstrated the usage of it, and then in October last year in the EOSC symposium, this was really a landmark event where the EOSC node was really first time made available to the whole European and beyond community. So people have been able to start registering, logging in, starting using it, testing it, providing us the feedback. And the uptake was quite fast, to be honest. In the first week, we had about 500 registered users. In a few months later, now we are at 2,500, I think, users registered and using it. So it goes quite fast, which does show and demonstrates that there is a need for such an environment. The node itself, this goes a little bit more in technical details of what I've mentioned earlier, allows for this single and transparent login. So as long as you're part of the EduGain, you can basically log in no matter which university or institution you're coming from. You can also create your own login. What is then, of course, important is that there is a system behind where based on the parameters or attributes that are received from the home IDP, that then you basically get allocated the resources accordingly. So there is the system behind where, depending what kind of a user you are, whether you're just a researcher, whether you are representing a department within a university or an institution itself, that will give you a number of credits within the system. And that's what we call accounting. So we have the so-called wallets, where it can be a personal wallet or a group wallet or an institutional wallet. And the credits are there in order to manage the demand. So there is a limited amount of resources. There is so much storage, so much compute available, and for example, a large file transfer time and so on, that then you need to use your credits in order to make use of it. Which then manages the demand. And as there was some sort of an estimation of different types of users, how much credits they get and how much. And these credits are valid for 3 months, and then they get renewed. So every 3 months you get a new batch of credits that you can keep using the whole thing. What is important in the EU node is also to mention that it's transactional. So it's not something that would be a permanent storage where users would store permanently their data. This is for repositories. But it's a place where you bring your data in, where you do whatever computation on it or analysis. You can use Jupyter notebooks or other means, and then you finally, with your outputs, when you want to permanently store them, you store them in another repository. This is not a repository at this stage. It offers different levels of integration of services. So there is a resource hub, which basically is based on OpenAIRE knowledge graph, where you and some others. So it's not purely OpenAIRE. It integrates also other things in, and it already offers, like when you search for it, 120 something million research objects that you can kind of search and browse around it. We are working towards curation of the service of those objects, also towards having some sort of a recommendations capacity, favorites, persistent identifiers, and so on. And then the level of integration of some services that can be provided by the service providers can be like fully integrated, so everything in the same user interface that is very linkable and very easy to use, or more kind of a decoupled way where you can find and integrate, but it's not fully embedded into the UI and maybe has some limitations of how much you can directly connect things, but there are still ways of doing. It also, of course, it provides application, data infrastructure, virtual machine, Kubernetes containers, and so on. So there's plenty of options there. And it offers also monitoring and help desk. So this is all embedded. Once you log in, everything, all of these elements are there. And maybe a few screenshots so that we change a little bit, that I stopped a bit talking and showing a little bit. It's nothing clickable here. I cannot really do a like end-to-end demonstration, but just for you to get a little bit of a feeling, this is where you land once you log in. You have this, how to say, dashboard where you can find number of native services here. For example, you have a file sync and share, which is based on the open source platforms, and you can basically create something like Google Drive there, where you can upload your data, where you can all collectively work on the documents, where you can then move it into the notebooks and work and analyze the data there or process it as you like. You can create virtual machines. So it's basically just a click and everything is related then linked to your credits availability. So you can establish one or the other thing, whatever you need for yourself or with a team together. You can even share credits within a team. So you can kind of bring, if you have a project and a number of people in the project have already an account with some credits allocated, they can bring those credits into the project, into the group, and then as a group collectively, then you can, I don't know, maybe you make use of a bigger machines, more compute, more storage in order to do whatever you need to do as a research group. So this is an example, for example, how a cloud container platform environment looks like, where you can just make a request. Most of these requests are automatically processed. So you just click, it takes a few moments to instantiate a particular machine. That's what we would expect, what a lot of us do know from a commercial providers. You make a request and it just instantiates machine and you can start using it it's a matter of minutes usually, so quite fast. And then depending on the size and the amount of the resources behind, it consumes more or less credits within a given time period. Also, there is this capacity of large file transfers, so you can really do an offline transfer. You can kind of request and push the information or into the system, and it will transfer to the destination or provide the access to be transferred to, which is also very handy because it just comes out of the box immediately. So these are a few like examples. I'm not going to demonstration of it, but just to give you a little bit of a feeling and a sense of how this looks like and what it really is, really once you log in, and what does that mean from a user perspective. And now just a few slides at the end to mention the EOSC Federation. So one node is not a federation, it's just one node. But you see that we have already well progressed on the developing federation. We are now working with 13 nodes across Europe. I mean, 13 organizations, or how to say, which are working to establish nodes that will be interconnected based on particular use cases that they will develop. And you can see that in the future, we do assume that there will be potentially no central node. This looks like a central, but it's not the purpose. There would be no central node, but the core capacity would be fully distributed among several of nodes, and the nodes would be linked one to each other, which means that, I don't know, if you are a researcher in the domain of particle physics and your institution or your organization has a EOSC node, you just go there. It works as usual very often. You don't need to change really your default working methods. But at the same time, once there, you will start to see resources that are coming from other nodes, because now everything is connected and linked. So you may discover a data set that you had not even know it exists that might be relevant to you, or you may see that there is a compute space or storage space somewhere available that could be, that might be useful for you, and you can just allocate it or request it, and you make use of it. So the nodes will be interlinked. Each of the nodes will have certain set of rules that will be specific to themselves, so access policies and so on that they will need to put in place. But then the users, according to that, will be able to use and navigate and either stay in one node that is their native node and discover things around, or then also move around from one node to another seamlessly with one login without having to do something extraordinary. And all that we hope to be properly linked also in the context of your HPC, so the high performance computing centers, which would also provide some resources to EOSC. This, I'm not going to go into details, but here is just to mention, that what it takes to have a federation is to have number of policies in place, who can access what is the acceptable use, what is the level of service to be provided, and what are some minimal standards. We all should work under the same kind of a interoperability framework, or otherwise this idea of, linking things together starts to shatter. So it's really important to have some sort of a baseline that is common. And of course, there are a number of other policies that need to be put in place, like also security and others. Like I mentioned, we are building this federation now together with a tripartite governance, commission, community, and member states and associated countries. And basically what's happening is these 13 organizations that will start the process of building their nodes and joining into the federation will kick off this work very soon. This we call the first wave of an intake, and then after that, subsequently, we will go through more waves, or we will start to onboard and enroll more organizations, so that the whole federation starts to really organically grow, and that community starts to really feel that they are part of a bigger environment, that they really take advantage of it and have access to a number of things that otherwise they wouldn't have. And with that, I think my presentation is at the end. So I would very much look forward to any questions that there might be. And I'll stop sharing here so to see the faces, if that's okay.
There are a few questions in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
How, according to your opinion, projects like European Open Source Cloud can support improvement of accessibility to science and knowledge to young people from poor and low socioeconomic group population?
So, I mean, definitely, as I said, this Open Science Cloud is accessible to anybody in principle. So you can register and you can already find information there. And then, of course, you can get involved through other initiatives like citizen science and so on. And we will probably in the future foresee certain allocation of resources to this kind of a part of the population that are not maybe necessarily officially researchers, but they are, citizen scientists and so on, that they could actually have access to things that otherwise they wouldn't be able to access, to maybe I talked a lot about the compute and storage and so on, but another element that is maybe not so was not so explicitly there, but maybe there might be a way in the future to have access to data sets from the research infrastructures, or maybe even to the research infrastructure themselves through a digital means. So I think this is gives a platform and gives a lot of options in the future that could allow for that.
Another question from Ilana.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see if an open access publishing platform is an alternative to a classic academic publishing system? To what extent?
Yeah, please.
To what extent the peer review, the peer review academic assessment issue can be solved on that platform?
So to the first question, I don't think it's an alternative. I don't know, maybe it can be, I think it's a parallel to, or it's an option. It provides options to the classical academic publishing system. In a way, we've seen that what is important for us is really the access to knowledge, especially when it's financed by public money. And still, the classical publishing system is true that there are costs associated. You need to be subscribed. You need to have subscriptions to it, and so on. And there are transformative agreements as well in place. While maybe a collective collective platform could also find its place. And, this is not the only one. There are plenty of other already open access publishing platforms and venues out there. I think this is just an option that we are providing from ourselves, where we would also like to show maybe also a number of novel ways of approaching things, like first maybe already sharing without necessarily needing to have a full peer review, and then peer review after. And what is very interesting is, let's say, open peer review. So the peer reviews that are there are also citable. So you can use also that as a part of the assessment, academic assessment. And it can also, increase the value, because there is this like transparent interaction between a researcher who publishes their work and the reviewers who provides feedback that can then improve the work itself. So I think that in general, it's is there where we are also trying to show a number of solutions that maybe before haven't been so much exploited. And yeah, hopefully that this will in a way have an impact also on the academic assessment. Yes.
Do you see any success with this platform? Do researchers in Europe upload their papers to ORE?
Yeah.
Because Israel, we tried it, and one of our biggest funder, ISF, tried to use F1000 as a platform, and because of it's not recognized that the publications, there is no impact factor, and so on, researchers didn't use it, and they stopped.
Yeah, this is where
this is comment.
That's why exactly is this a question that that's why I started with research assessment reform, right? I mean, it is so fundamental that if the journal impact factor is the only information that we all take into account just because it's easy, right? Because it's a number and we all like numbers and it's easy to understand numbers. It's more difficult to understand what's behind the number, but at least numbers you can understand and compare to. With one each other. It's an easy way out, but is it the right way out is another question. And indeed, I mean, we've seen that in some of the countries there are restrictions because in their research assessment system, if the journal doesn't have a journal impact factor, it's not recognized or doesn't count towards the assessment and so on. And we have managed to reduce those obstacles already in a number of countries. We have worked with them. The ministries have decided to change the rules to integrate that. But there is still a long way to go. But indeed, I mean, the moving away from just a quantitative number that can be sometimes completely misleading. Not always, I'm not saying that, but like it can be misleading. That would be useful, and that would benefit actually platforms like that don't necessarily compete with others for a number.
Shmuel asked whether you do if you're recommending Israel to develop a platform like EOSC.
Sorry, I'm not sure I understood. Recommending Israel
to develop.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think yes. I would say yes. We see, for example, now when we are very, very technical also, when it's not only policy, when it's not only funding fair initiatives and communities and so on, when we are really talking about infrastructure and how to organize that and how to have that, fully production grade level operational and in place, we see a lot of interest from a number of member states to set up their own national kind of EOSCs and then connect it into the European level, at the European level. So I would say yes. I mean, of course, there are ways of doing it, different ways, different approaches. And maybe why not one day also link it to the European EOSC? Why not?
Israel is in some way a part of the EOSC. We have a representative there.
Yes.
And maybe in the future we'll have a node in Israel too. So is there any sense of doing something separately? Isn't it a waste of resources if we could join the big platform?
But that's what I meant by, doing EOSC in Israel. I'm more talking about this kind of a national level platforms like we see emerging now in the like national EOSCs, if I can say so, or national nodes, if I can say so, right? Because and there is always this question, discipline versus, country. disciplines go beyond, right, borders, and you collaborate with a number of researchers across globe, and then you create national nodes. And what, where does that fit? But we see a lot of like countries approaching that from a perspective of, preservation, long-term preservation of scientific data. We see them providing additional storage and computing capacities, building data centers and so on, which at the European level we don't invest into the infrastructure in such a manner. We procured some services, but we don't build buildings or data centers behind. Well, nationally they do. So maybe in that sense, to understand it, that there might be a value in a national node that could be kind of a national level EOSC, and then integrate it into the wider landscape.
Just a small question about to clarify things. To my best of understanding, I thought that EOSC is also I won't say a repository, but you can find data there. And from what I understood today, it was more like an infrastructures of tools or infrastructures.
Yeah. It is exactly that. It's an infrastructure of infrastructure. It's a federation of nodes. And okay, today we only have one node, and we will be working very hard now from March until the November with a number of the organizations to get them integrated. And indeed, at the moment, you can already find data sets. You don't even need EOSC to find that. You have OpenAIRE, knowledge graph, and so on. So you can search that. The key question is, and that's very important for us, is how to bring additional value there. And we see that through integration, through working with organizations to develop protocols and standards, so that tomorrow, for example, imagine you go to a Zenodo and there is a button, you can just click and, your data set appears in your virtual environment, whichever that is. That's kind of a level of integration that probably we would like to see in the future, where it's very easy to get from one data set to another, to move things left and right, to process it here, send it to some colleague somewhere else, and so on, or not even send it. Just say, you're joining the project. Here's what we are working on, and you are part of it.
So what you mean, if I understand right, so if I want to look for data, I should do it in OpenAIRE, Portal, or Zenodo, or whatever. And it's not that EOSC is aggregating OpenAIRE platform and more.
We do add some additional platforms in, and we do notice now when we were talking with a number of member states that not everything is indexed in OpenAIRE yet. So we also need to work on that, so that, yes, number of other things get visible and findable. Let's start with findable of the FAIR acronym. But we do already integrate other things like data.europa.eu, which is basically all the data that JRC, which is DG of Director General of the Commission, which has the scientific units and so on, produces. So we are trying to integrate that already there. That was not part of the OpenAIRE, for example. So there are additional things there. And there is another element that, of course, I've not even talked about, but in the context of wider European data strategy, there is this idea that we will have a number of domain-specific data spaces, research being just one of them. I mentioned transport. There might be public institutions data space and so on, where we would look into how to link that. So the researchers, for example, could have an easy access to, I don't know, demographic information of any country of Europe that can be linked with another research information somewhere in a more seamless way than it's today. I'm just giving an example, of course.
Any other questions from the audience? Yes, Amit.
I have two questions. First, the type of regular article is mainly concerned on mechanisms and theories and not on data. And this is about the credit. That actually they don't like that you only send data. This is not, and for the public sharing, what it's good is the data. The second thing is that the open access is demanding from the researcher to pay for the for the publishment. So did Horizon including in the fund also the publishing?
Okay, thanks for the questions. I'll try to answer. So regarding the articles, yeah, yeah, of course. I mean, not everything has necessarily big data sets behind. Can be, can be also literature, can be many other things behind that. But yes, I mean, what is important is also the scientific method behind, so that also should be explained, and this brings the quality to the article. But where possible, and like I said, as open as possible, as close as necessary, if the data is behind, it should be shared. That's at least the policy of Horizon Europe and the policy that we advocate as an open science policy. Regarding the cost of the publishing, we do cover costs of publishing, but only if it is fully open access. So if it is not, then Horizon Europe would not cover the cost of it. That would not be eligible cost to cover.
Any other questions? If not, I'll thank you very much for a very interesting and knowledgeable lecture. And with that, we finish our Open Access Week. We just have another presentation next Monday, the one that was rescheduled. So I hope to see you then. And thank you again, Dejan, for being with us and for sharing with us your experience and knowledge and letting us know something about EOSC. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for inviting me, but also congratulations to having this full week of open science topics. I think it's amazing that you have managed to pull this off and organize it so well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.